UFP, the United Federation of Podcasts.
Welcome to Franchise Fatigue, the brand new podcast on the brand new podcasting network, the United Federation of Podcasts. I'm your host, Brandon-Shea, and joining me is my ever-constant co-host, Zach Moore. How are you doing, Zach?
Hey, Brandon, ever-constant co-host, indeed. Brandon and I have done a lot of podcasting over the last few years and become really good friends, and I'm really looking forward to this new project we're starting together.
Yeah, me too. We had a lot of fun this summer. And for the listeners who are joining us for our first episode here, what we're doing is based on something that happened this summer. I was very excited that the new Halloween movie was going to be coming out, Halloween 2018. And I messaged you, Zach, one night, and I said, I really love these movies and I need a reason to rewatch them all. Will you do a podcast with me? And you said yes. So we recorded an episode on each of the Halloween movies, and we released them once a week over a period of 11 weeks leading up to the brand new release. And we had a lot of fun. At least I think we had a lot of fun. Did you have fun?
Yeah, it was great. Not just revisiting these movies. As you said, podcasting gives you an excuse to rewatch movies that you want to, but you're like, do I have the time? Do I not? No, if you have a purpose to do it, you make a point to do it. And yeah, we watched all 11 of those, and then getting to talk about them with you, and then just the seeing how a franchise goes from where its inception to where it is today is just a very interesting journey, and that was really the inspiration for what we're doing here.
Mm-hmm. And part of what I wanted to do with that one, and part of what I want to do with this podcast here, is not only do I like movies, but I like sequels. What do you think of sequels?
Man, sequels are extremely hit or miss, right? Because you love a first movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you want more of that first movie. But you don't want the same thing over again, but you don't want something too different. And that is the fine line that a sequel has to walk. And we have seen so many franchises over the years do some great sequels, do some bad sequels, do some ill-advised continuations when they should have walked away and left good enough alone. So I've ultimately, when it comes down to it, the way franchises have been going, they're getting to the point where they're kind of coming back around and being good again. Like mm-hmm. Halloween, for example. There were some dark days in the Halloween franchise, right? But going through all of that gave us what we got now. You could say the same thing about, Batman or Rocky or any of these franchises. So it's at the end of the day, it's entertainment. So I say keep bringing them on and just keep throwing darts at the board. And you can't hit a bullseye unless you keep throwing those darts, right? So bring on the sequels.
Yeah. See, I've always been a fan of sequels, and whenever I've found a movie that I like, if there's ever been sequels for it, I've always sought them out and wanted to watch them, and I've always wanted to be a completionist when it comes to franchises of movies. No matter how many movies there are, I would like to see all of the sequels. And I've always enjoyed them, as I get more involved with social media, I see all these people, crapping all over sequels and stuff like this, and I don't think that's fair, and I don't think that's deserved. Sequels are different than the original. Generally, they're not as good, but I don't think they're any less fun to watch for the most part. There's some bad stuff out there, I'll admit. Halloween 5 wasn't very good, but, I'm still glad to watch it, and I'm glad to have it, because there's really good things that are in it. And I like to look for the good stuff, and I like to look for the things that I enjoy in these sequels, and I like to have fun watching them. And, that's one of the things that I found out watching those with you, like watching the Halloween movies with you this past summer. I like these sequels, and I like looking for the good stuff. And I don't, I'll sit there and say if something's bad, but I want to find all the good stuff and I want to enjoy it. So that's kind of what our approach is for this series of podcasts. Now, the interesting thing about franchises, we got to kind of set a couple of base rules here. Now, Zach, you don't know these questions that I'm going to ask. I haven't actually prepared you for them or anything, but we kind of got to come up with some rules for the podcast. Now, I know how I want to go and approach this, but I got to ask you a couple of things. Like, for example, is there a minimum limit to a franchise for you? How many movies can be in a franchise?
That's a great question. Now, I'd say, and I know you're going to, because we had some discussion before off microphone about this, you might disagree with me here. I would say at least 3.
Mm-hmm.
Because 3, you have a trilogy, and a trilogy is a franchise. There are a lot of duologies out there, but when you stop at 2, you have your first one and your sequel, and the sequel is very important. And sometimes it's artistically they stop at 2, and other times like it kind of fizzles out and they stop at 2. So in order to get that third one, I think is very important. It kind of gives you that franchise tag, because if you only have 2 movies, I don't think you can really call it a franchise. You get an original and a sequel. Mm-hmm. And sure, any hit original can get a sequel, but can that sequel get a sequel? And to me, that is what makes a franchise.
Okay. That's an interesting approach, and we were kind of going back and forth on this. Now, we're going to make this decision live on air here, guys.
Okay.
Because I was messaging you, and I'm like, I really want to cover 2001 and 2010, because I just got the awesome experience that here in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada, they actually played a 70mm print of 2001 at our IMAX theater. And coming up in January, they're actually going to be playing 2010, the brand new 4K digital restoration at the IMAX theater as well. And so I'm like, man, I would like to talk about these, but is 2 a franchise? And, while part of my approach is, yes, we want to call this franchise fatigue because, we're fans of franchises. But I mean, it's also spreading and sharing the love of sequels. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of why I don't think we should limit ourselves. We don't have to, there's not a lot that I'd probably want to do, but I mean, I don't think we need to limit ourselves on stuff that has 3 or more. I'm comfortable doing something that just has 2.
Because, I think if we're going to decide this live on air,
mm-hmm.
I'd say they would be an exception if we did a series of 2. And also, if you get a series of 2, I get a series of 2.
No.
So we go back and forth. And as you can have your 2 movie franchises and I can have mine, and we'll go forward that way.
I think that we should do that. We should alternate. So I'll get to choose a franchise, and then you get to choose a franchise. Yeah.
I think that's fair.
So, so my first choice is James Bond, and your first choice is 2001.
Yeah. I was going to say my first choice is Godzilla.
And how many of those are there?
There's about 30.
Oh, my goodness. I don't want to cover those at all.
We'll see you guys in 2021.
No, I don't like those movies very much. I try. I tried to like Godzilla, but I'm not a big fan of them.
So I'm a huge kaiju fan, but that's kind of its own category. So don't worry, we won't go down that road in this podcast, because that would take a whole year.
Yeah, I think
right?
so.
I mean, if you did the Godzilla, there's plenty of great podcasts out there that cover those specifically. So anyway,
okay. Now, so then to elaborate on that, so let's say we wanted to cover The Thing. Okay, So we've got the original. And then we got the remake, and then we got the prequel to the remake.
That's 3 movies, so that qualifies in my criteria for a franchise.
Even though one of them is just a remake and one of them has an original?
Well, and we can kind of branch off this question to a side question, right? Do remakes count as part of the same franchise? Like if we were going to cover a franchise which has a remake in it.
well, right off the bat, we'd say yes, because of Halloween. We just did Halloween.
Exactly. Like if we were going to do RoboCop, right, you would do all 4 movies, right? You wouldn't just stop at the first 3. So I would count remakes as part of a franchise, because the reason they made the remake is because the franchise was successful at a time. So the franchise existing is why they went back to that intellectual property. So that being said, I would count The Thing as a franchise because there's 3 movies.
Okay, and I'm okay with that, so that's fine with me. Now, what if there's just 2, like an original and a remake?
See, that's not a franchise. That's even below the other 2, because that is a remake, because you have reboots. Because when you remake you want to restart, you want to reboot a franchise. That's why they use the term reboot, because it implies there's been a series of films that have been going on, and get a Control Alt Delete, go back to the beginning, for whatever reason why they wanted to end it. Right, when there's only one, and you remake it again, I don't see that as a franchise. If there's only one original film and then one remake, because it's the same movie twice. There's no sequel. Okay. There's no sequels involved at all there. Now, here's a wild card. My favorite film of all time is the 1933 King Kong. Right? It has a sequel, Son of Kong. It has a 1976 remake, King Kong. That remake has a sequel, King Kong Lives. There's a third remake, 2005's King Kong by Peter Jackson. So I would consider that a franchise because almost each version has a sequel. And then combined, that's a group of films that kind of make its own franchise. But if you have something like, oh man, I'm trying to think of like one individual film and one individual remake right now.
Well, let's just say The Man Who Knew Too Much by Hitchcock, because I've got a Hitchcock podcast. So Hitchcock remade his own film, The Man Who Knew Too Much.
That's even the guy remaking your own film. I mean, come on.
Yes.
That absolutely, that is not a franchise in my opinion. Because part of what we want to examine here, and we're having an open discussion here, right, is the evolution of like of a franchise. And if the same guy remaking it, and that's the only two versions, I would definitely not include it. Now, if you want to throw in Bill Murray's The Man Who Knew Too Little, we might have a conversation there. So
I don't think it's related. I haven't seen it, but okay. So then that leads us to the question, since we're talking about the Grandmaster Hitchcock. So let's say we wanted to do Psycho. So we do Psycho 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we would do the remake. Would we, however, cover the TV movie Bates Motel? Because there's not the TV series. There is a TV movie, Bates Motel.
I was unaware of this until recently when I was doing some, Halloween season Psycho watching and whatnot. I had no idea there was a TV movie, Bates Motel. It kind of explained to me what that is, and then I can give you an informed answer.
As far as I know, it's just a prequel. I haven't seen it. I've got a DVD that's got Psycho 2, 3, 4, and Bates Motel on it that I picked up for $5 at Walmart, and I haven't seen it yet.
If it's included on the same DVD, that would, in theory, make it part of the same series. So I thought Psycho 4 was kind of a prequel. The beginning, right? There's flashbacks to young Norman Bates. So
I haven't seen that one either.
Interesting.
So I'm not
so
sure.
Then, I would be interested to do that because actually, Brandon, I haven't seen any of the Psycho sequels. So that would be an interesting, and part of it is the fun for you and me is like experiencing things that we love again, and then also seeing new things the first time, because there was a handful of those Halloween movies that I had never seen, so that was a fun experience for me. So something like Psycho, yes, we do Psycho 2, 3, 4, Bates Motel, and then the remake from 1997, 98, I believe.
Okay, so then the next challenge on this one then that we got to determine. So two-parters are okay. We just don't want to do too many. A movie and a remake's no good. Got to have some sequels. The TV movie's okay generally. If there's probably not going to be a lot.
If they're connected, you talk about Alfred Hitchcock. There's The Birds. There's a sequel to The Birds called The Birds 2: Land's End, which
just
is
awful. Just
I believe,
terrible.
Was it made for TV?
I don't know, but
because it certainly seemed like it was.
it's just awful, and I tried to rip that part of my brain out.
Well, we should definitely talk about those at some point. If we're going to talk about 2001, 2010, we got to talk about The Birds. But
yes. Okay, so then the question then is, so what order do we do them? So let's take the Star Wars movies, for instance. What order would we cover those? Would we cover them in the release order, or would we cover them in the order that they take place? And then how do we throw Rogue One and Solo in?
Well, first of all, do we even want to talk about movies like Star Wars? Because that Star Wars has been discussed over and over and over again out there. There's so many opinions and everything. Like, is there anything left to say about those big franchises? I know that's not the question you asked, but I'll ask you that, and then we get back to your question. What do you think?
Well, I've never talked about them.
Well, I guess we're talking about Star Wars then. Then okay. In the case of Star Wars, because especially these solo films, like Solo, are really they make the timeline confusing, right? Because before you'd be like, okay, we'll talk about the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, and they were their own thing, right? So all you have to do is flip the order. But now you have movies coming out in between the sequel trilogy, which is after all the other ones, but these take place in between the other two trilogies, so it's very complicated. So I would look at it the same way I look at the X-Men movies, right? Which is also very confusing timeline if you try to like watch them in some kind of a chronological in-universe order. I would say release date is the only way to do it, because then you can, again, our objective here, our point of view is we like to see the evolution of a franchise. So if you're jumping from like 1999 to 2002 to 2005 to 2016 for Rogue One, and then you go to 1977. Now that's an interesting viewing experience at home. Like if you want to watch them that way, I think that's cool. Mix these things up, right? But for our purposes, I think we should discuss them in release date order.
Okay. Now, I don't want to do this for all of them, but there's a couple of interesting, like